This is Tim Minear, co-executive producer on Angel and the writer of this episode that you're looking at, which is Are You Now or Have You Ever Been? This was the first episode that I wrote for Season 2 of Angel, and so far probably my favorite episode that I wrote because I got to do pretty much everything I've ever wanted to do by ripping off all my favorite film noirs. The hardest part of this episode was writing the present-day scenes. This really isn't a typical Angel flashback episode wherein you will have an A-plot in the present day and scenes in the past which reflect on the A-plot in the present day. This story is really one story that just simply takes place over a period of about 50 years, and it's told out of order. And in this first scene, we see that Angel, he ran into this hotel in the previous episode the week before, and he's having his minions, Wesley and Cordelia, look into the past of this hotel. And he's not telling them why, which is a little suspicious to them, but clearly he has his reasons. And as they start musing on this photographic effect we're about to see, which came out about 60% of what I was hoping it would be, we start pushing into this black and white photograph, and it becomes color, and now we're in the 50s as the color comes up. And then we go into the hotel in 1952. This is what we call the Titanic shot. I actually tried to pull this shot out of the episode. Joss made me put it back. Joss's show. It is a beautiful shot, and actually we shot this with a variable speed camera, so that's why the slow motion becomes regular speed here. And here you see the character that we on the set were calling Chet, the bellhop, and the actor playing John Kapelos, who plays the hotel manager, who was apparently in Forever Night, as I kept reading on the internet, and people, I guess, thought that, I don't know, I was ripping off Forever Night by casting a guy who was on that show. Again, the look of this episode can be attributed to our brilliant director of photography, Herb Davis, who filtered all the 50s period scenes with a specific glowy filter. I don't obviously know what it was, but whatever he did, it's just perfect. The director of this episode, David Semmel, and I worked very closely together in conceiving what this episode would look like. And in my script, I described very long passages of action without dialogue. And when you read the script, you really feel like, hopefully, that you're just slowly sort of drifting through this world in almost dreamlike quality. And I think that Mr. Semmel really captured that here. And again, this is not sort of standard camera work for a television show, where you set up the camera and shoot a master, and then you pop it and you get closer shots, and you basically use that and you cut around with those specific shots. This was, again, I just felt it was very important that the camera slowly moved through this hotel, through this space, so that we really felt like we were, in the middle of this atmosphere. And here we're about to learn that something terrifying is living in room 217 of this hotel, and that the bellhop does not want to have to face it. And he hears something moving around inside, and now he's backing away. Anything to get away from the terrible, hideous, scary monster inside room 217. And now we hear the door being unlocked inside, and we're about to learn just what that terrifying thing is. Sets by Stuart Blatt. And here it comes. Get ready for it. It's David Boreanaz. Again, I just think all the production elements worked here. Our costumer and our production designer and our cinematography and the hair and makeup just all created this great 50s feel, in my opinion. This is the second episode of the season, and we knew that we were going to do a story that set up the fact that Angel was going to move operations to this hotel. And we knew we wanted to give him a past in the hotel. And for the longest time, we thought what we would do is a story that took place in the 40s, because we all love the 40s, and we thought that would be quite glamorous, possibly get some Nazis in there and do kind of a World War II thing. And then one day Joss came to me and said, I think it should be in the 50s. And suddenly it made perfect sense, because we had already sort of been moving toward a story of paranoia. And certainly the 50s, if you're going to set something era specific, you're going to put it in the 50s if you're going to do a story of paranoia. I never thought we actually got the hotel run down enough for my taste. I was there when we shot this, and I kept going out there and throwing more garbage on the floor. I really wish we had taken a spray can and just spray painted graffiti all over the thing so that it looked like squatters had been living in it. Unfortunately, we had just built this set. And the schedule as it was, we were moving back and forth between the time. That's actually the back of Mike Massa, the stunt double, because I knew I wanted to do a shot where we came off Angel's back into this world, and Angel would enter into the world without us having cut. So obviously we couldn't use David's back there, because as we come around here to the door, here comes Mr. Boreanaz entering. And this was one of a few Steadicam shots that we used in this show. And again, for that very fluid feeling of being in the film itself. We're about to cut around here. I really wanted this to be one shot, but we really couldn't manage it. So that was one shot up until here, and now this is really a new shot here. But it feels like it's all one continuous action. But however, we did use some Steadicam, but mostly we used a dolly, because the Steadicam gave it too much of a drift, kind of a feeling of floating, and what we really wanted was something more deliberate. And here we're back on our dolly now. This is one of my favorite frames coming up here, not because my name's there, but because of the silhouette of the guy in the hat in the background. Doors open here. Here comes the movie star and his young friend exiting the building. Very important to me that when the movie star and Angel re-enter their rooms, that the doors shut at the same time, and I sat in the editing room for a while trying to make that work just the way I wanted it to, and I felt it did. I really wanted to go out wide here, and then we see they step in, and the doors shut exactly at the same time. This may be my favorite sequence in this episode. For the first few scenes, Angel says nothing. And in fact, we're really with him, we're in his point of view as we pass through this world. We're not really a part of it. Everything's happening on the edges of the frame, as it is with Angel's life. Things happening on the outside, he's not really involved with anything. Again, just long tracking shots of Angel moving through these corridors, and he sees this guy up ahead. This shot we never quite got exactly the way I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be very clear that when Angel leans over to see who this guy's talking to, and he hears these whispering voices, that there is in fact no one there. Now, there appears to be no one there, but there could be, for all we know, just around that corner. Unfortunately, we couldn't pull the camera back to see down the hall to see that there was no one there, because the hall ends basically right where you saw there a moment ago. There is no more hallway. But I felt that going back and having the guy not there at least gave it a mysterious quality. Again, now we just tracking back. Here's the guy who's been lurking around in the hallway. The goon, I think I called him in the script. Angel re-enters his room with his ice so he can put his blood on ice. And we're about to see the ingenue of the piece emerging from his bathroom. Again, I just love the way everything looked. Everything just slightly glowing. And this episode turned out to be about, I think, 9 minutes over the length of what we could do, so I had to find 9 minutes of material to cut, which was very painful because I loved every moment of it. We read a lot of actresses for this role, and actually Melissa here, who got the part, who I think is very good, I was dubious at first because she was so incredibly modern looking when she came in to read. I've seen her in a few films. She has a small, almost a bit part really in Bring Out the Dead, which is a Scorsese film, and she's really this sort of street punk kid screaming at her boyfriend to beat up a guy, and I just wasn't sure if she could sell this idea of this sort of 50s innocence, and she really pulled it off with some help from hair and makeup, obviously, and wardrobe. Again, Dave Semmel just really shooting this sequence properly. The camera always seems to be just where I want it to be. There was a line here at the door when he pulls open the door that I was sad that we had to lose. And in fact, you can hear that some of the dialogue feels like there may in fact be pieces missing. A couple of the couplets don't really make sense in context. But there was a moment here where the guy at the door, the goon, leans forward and sniffs Angel and says, "Is that your lilac perfume I'm smelling? I don't think so. I don't think you're going to mind if I come in and take a look around," which is when he flashes the gun. And right there you can see he had been leaning forward, but we had to cut that piece for time. Coming up, probably my favorite shot, which was a piece that it took us a long time to figure out how to get. And you'll see it coming up here. It's when Angel runs the private detective down the hallway and walks back toward Judy, walks past her and slams the door in her face as he re-enters his room. It was very important for me that we didn't cut, that we were on the door that he had slammed in her face, and the camera arced back around to where we expected to find her standing. And instead we find him in the present day standing there, so that the feeling was almost as if he'd slammed the door in his own face. So we had to do it with a series of cuts. And we actually went back and reshot the last piece of it. And coming up here, that's not David Boreanaz, that's somebody in his wardrobe, so that we can come back down like this, past some torn wallpaper to see David standing there in the present day. And then we pop out and we see, we're in the dilapidated version of this hotel. And Herb actually pulled the filter off, the 50s filter off, and slowly changed the lighting as we were coming off the door there. So the lighting actually changes from the door to the pan over to David. There was some material in this scene that we cut. I think Wesley talks more about the hotel's history. It was all stuff that I thought was really interesting, but again, 9 minutes over. Unfortunately, Alexis and Charisma's scenes were the first things to get trimmed. Because we did seem to be getting the exposition we needed. There was an entire runner that I had between them where Cordelia says, "I'll bet whatever drove Angel crazy 50 years ago was a woman." And she goes off on that tack for the whole episode. And then finally there's a moment in the last scene when they show up to meet up with him at the hotel, and she says, "It was a woman, wasn't it?" And he looks at her and sort of nods, and that whole subplot got pulled out. And I think probably for the best. Very much fun shooting these period photographs in the hotel lobby with our extras. Again, this is the famous line where Cordelia explains to us why vampires photograph. Actually, she doesn't explain to us why vampires photograph, but only that they don't photograph well, which would be important to her. Again, this scene, probably one of the hardest scenes to write, since Cordelia and Wesley in this story do not, in fact, know what they are supposed to be investigating. It's very difficult to write a scene that's getting us exposition with characters who don't know what they're doing. And so I actually made the scene about the fact that they had no idea what they were doing, which seemed to help. Coming up here, some very interesting shots that got cut. I was sad to see them cut, but standards and practices made me pull them out of the episode. And I do think you still understand what's happening. We come off here. Actually, this is the same exact set that David was just in, I think. Actually, this was the other hotel room that we used for Judy's room as well. And right here it's working as the salesman's room. We hear the whispering voices, which I thought was very effective. The salesman comes over and picks up his gun. This whole sequence went on much longer before we see David pouring his blood. Basically, the way I wanted to end this act was we see the guy shoot himself in the head, and we actually shot some of this, where he sits down here against the bed. And in my first cut, he puts the pillow up against his head, and then he presses the muzzle of the gun against the pillow, which was a pretty disturbing image, which I had to lose. So here's where he brings up the pillow. And what's missing, of course, is the very next moment he presses the gun against that pillow, but that's gone. And here, I believe you're hearing the gunshot. The way it was cut originally, he heard a gunshot, we cut back to the room, and we see blood pooling out. And then we come back to David drinking blood as blood's pooling next door. And then actually, we hear a guy yelling to turn off the record player that's skipping, and then David reaches over and turns on his radio, and jazz comes up, which I thought punctuated the moment that he wasn't paying any attention to what was happening. Here are two of my favorite characters in this story. Often these smaller, ancillary side characters are very painful because you may not get the actor that you want. And, they're not your main characters, and they better be awfully good if they're going to sustain scenes that don't include your key cast. And I think I was lucky enough in this episode to just really every small character and every actor brought something interesting to what they were doing. And I really felt like they had a life beyond the frame, and they weren't just little stick figures I was moving around. That was one of my favorite moments as well. I have many of them. When John Kapelos comes very close to the lens and the sound of the bellhop's voice drops out in the background. Some more dialogue that got cut coming up here. Originally, when we cut down to what I call the Rogues Gallery downstairs, they're talking about the death of the salesman, and the actor thinks they're talking about the play. And then we learn that, no, in fact, there's a salesman living in the hotel who committed suicide. And we see David coming down the stairs in the background here. That shot didn't quite work for me because it really does become all about... It works in a way, but we probably should have started closer on David so that we understood that he was moving by there in the background. And again, scary voices coming up. There was a whole sequence that we cut where we see David going down through the basement and out the trapdoor. And tentacles swishing around in the darkness, which I really felt like didn't work, and nor did we need it. Kelly Manners managed to make the schedule work so that we could shoot up here at the Griffith Observatory. I was trying desperately to think of some iconic Los Angeles image that would evoke the 50s, and of course, Griffith Observatory is it, as it does appear in Rebel Without a Cause. And there are a lot of little nods to famous 50s films and also authors in this episode. People have noticed that David seems to be wearing James Dean's jacket here from Rebel, the red jacket. And actually, we were shooting. If the frame opened up just a little bit to the right, you'd see the statue of James Dean, just to camera right of where we're looking now. And every time we turn around and see the back of David's head, that view was actually shot at the back of the observatory looking down over LA, and this front view was shot in front of the observatory. So really, every time we cut around to her point of view of David from behind, such as here, that's in a completely different spot than where this was shot. But we wanted to be looking at the most interesting things possible. We shot up there until the sun came up. I think we wrapped at about 6, right before the sun came up. And in fact, it was the most incredibly beautiful night of the year. It was balmy and probably 60 degrees all night. You walk around in your shirt sleeves, and you really felt like we were in the 50s. It was pretty amazing. This scene went on much longer than it does here. It took a lot of nipping and tucking to make the thing move. I think it works pretty well, frankly. I love this look back that he gives. A lot of what I thought were really great lines in the script, I cut, and they became silences instead of actual lines, which seemed to work better and say a lot more. And I also love when we come back to him in rack focus, and he exhales the smoke. It's a pretty great moment. These shots... Again, just a beautiful set by Stewart. And just the dreamlike quality. Also, I had Rob Kral, who I asked him to become Bernard Herrmann for this episode in the score, and I think he did quite an amazing job. The music is not it doesn't sound like anything we've ever had on our show, and it really doesn't sound like anything that you normally hear on a television show. He scored it like a movie.
It wasn't a suicide.
And I was very happy with that. This scene, I believe, is a great example of the talent of Dave Semmel, the director. I mean, you see a lot of really great transitions and camera movement in this episode, which is the flashier stuff. But here, what you have is a 4.5 or 5-page scene of two people talking, which could get visually boring very quickly in a small room like this. And he just really seemed to know where to, how to block the actors and where to put the camera, so that every time the scene starts to change a little bit, so does the camera shot. And so he's telling us emotionally what the distance is between these characters by where he has the actors stand and how he breaks them apart in the middle of something. David leaning forward to light her cigarette here, and how he brings them together again. And I think it stays visually interesting the entire time. And again, it's a very long, talky scene. And so the skill of his hand is less noticeable here, which actually makes it stand out more in a way.
I think maybe they want
we had to shoot this insert coming up twice. The first time I got the insert back, an insert is just a brief cutaway to something that perhaps they won't have time to shoot when they're shooting the main story here. So we cut to this. That was shot by an insert crew. The first time I got that shot back, it was clearly Monopoly money. It was not real money, and I had to make them go back and shoot it again. Although I've been told since then that money, while real, is maybe, not period money. But, you can't have everything. Plus, guy vampire. So I'm just saying, not everything going to be realistic. Editing can be tricky when someone's doing something like smoking a cigarette or drinking. And I don't think we had too many matching problems here. Michael Stern cut this, and I've worked with him before on other shows, and he's been with us since the first season. He's a very good editor. Really, really put it together well. There was a line coming up here that I wanted to cut, where David talks about the reason. Oh, here, this shot here was supposed to be, she looks over at the money bag, and we think perhaps she's hearing the whispery voices that the other characters have been hearing, because she almost seems to be talking to herself. I leave that to the viewer to decide. So there was a line here that I wanted to cut coming up, where Angel says, "They fired you because they're afraid of you." And it seemed a little preachy. Unfortunately, he takes a couple steps forward when he delivers the line, and there was no way for me to lose the line because he kept popping forward in frame.
I am something.
It's coming up here. I really love the way she played this. I remember we were on the set, and she was underplaying everything, and you'll probably notice in the wider shots, in the master shots, she's pretty much underplaying. And then when we got in closer to do her coverage, we had her, or David Semmel, the director, just really had her go to a darker place. And she really brought it up, and I thought that was great. That's where he stepped forward. That's the line I wanted to lose. Oh, well, it'll be there forever. And then occasionally, when we'd pop back to the wider shots, we would take a line reading from a closer take and put it in her mouth in the wider shot, which I do a lot. If I like a reading, a vocal reading better on something in a closer shot, but I like the visual of the wider, so I'll mix and match. This scene is the act break. The first part of this scene that you saw earlier in the story was the beginning of this scene. It was one scene, it all took place at the end of the act. And there was another Cordelia Wesley scene that I was sad to have to cut. And I ended up cutting that one scene in half and making it into two scenes, which was Sean Ryan's idea. To help me lose time. Here's the big basement set that Stewart built that we thought we'd never use. We've used it a lot. It certainly works great here. Here's an example of a scene where I felt that Melissa did not, in fact, play the paranoia enough. And so every line that she is speaking is a loop, which means it was ADR, additional dialogue recording. That means on the dub stage, we had her revoice this to change the performance. Here, Angel's hearing the little whispery voices. And a few lines here, actually, when he comes down that I cut. He jumps forward a little bit in frame, but you don't really notice it. And he's hearing the voices again. And again, I'm pretty sure that much of her performance is looped here in this portion of the scene as well. But mostly it was that first part of the scene where I actually added some lines so that she would just be talking nonstop through the whole first part of the scene. We're about to go back to present day. People have often asked me, what happened to the money? Did Angel spend it? Did he use it to buy the hotel? My feeling has always been that he sent it back to the bank from which it was stolen. We just never covered that in an episode. And here you see all the graffiti, which is what I wanted to do in the hotel lobby. I just thought that would be great if there was graffiti everywhere. This is another insert shot. Clearly no one looked up there in 50 years and found this bag of cash, which was lucky. And I always love this shot too, just sort of slowly drifting up to Angel's face. You're going to hear Wesley saying, "I can sense it," which was a loop line I used to transition from Angel sensing the presence still here in this room to Wesley trying to figure out what happened there 50 years ago. Parts of this scene were also cut. Again, just trimming things here and there to make it fit. Because the episode was, as I said, 9 minutes over. Not sure what that shirt is she's wearing, but it's really interesting. Here's Charisma being coy and funny. And she is funny. She gives him the phone. Another thing I liked about this story and telling it out of order, and again, it's not like, it's two different stories, it's one story. Angel here is getting the idea of how to kill the demon, even though it just seems to us that he's restoring the power to turn on the lights. And he tells Wesley that he already knows how to kill this thing because he's already done the research. And we're going to find out in the next cut that he did the research 50 years ago. Searched forever for an exterior period shot of Hollywood Boulevard. Don't love that shot. I remember we were shooting this scene, and Denver here is supposed to be watching an episode of I Love Lucy, which would have been broadcast that year. And so we hear some sitcom laughter. We didn't have a TV. Actually, the set dresser sent down a TV from like 1975 or something. I mean, it was clearly a portable TV. It would not have been made in 1952. And we scrambled like crazy. And our other set, the on-set dresser, created the rabbit ears with the clothes hanger. So you get the impression that there's a television there, but in fact there isn't. I love this actor. I wish I could remember his name offhand. He reappears again this year in another episode, but 50 years later, and we recast it with an older actor, but it matched pretty well. Again, Dave Semmel, economy of camera work. The bellhop enters. Manager rises. Feeling paranoid. We learn a little bit about why this guy's going to get arrested later, which we learned earlier in the story. And we push through them to the argument that's taking place in the lobby. I just think that's a great shot. All these actors just really working. I think we understand what the archetypes are. This is a scene that I wanted to pull out and then put it back and wasn't sure if we needed it. And in the end, I felt it was important, and so did Joss. Melissa, or Judy, hearing the voices and shutting the window, trying to be strong against them. And then we come back to the bookstore, I believe. This is a bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard, And it actually is a used bookshop, and they sell all kinds of wonderful old books. And unfortunately, from what I understand, they're going to have to close down. They've lost their lease or something, and they're going to put up a movie theater there. And we returned to this very location for the bookstore this year in an episode that will air next week. I love the way Herb lit it. Again, just wonderful lighting and camera work. And I like David's snarky attitude here. That phone made me crazy, because I don't believe that phone is a period phone. It looks like something Mrs. Brady should be answering, but it does not look like something that Mrs. Cleaver would be answering, and so that bothered me. Perhaps if we had painted it black or something, it would have looked right.
Lightning strike, you know, finger heaven kind of thing, but short of that, I'd go with something big and heavy.
There was a whole gag with that price tag that I cut out of the final cut, where Angel comes up into the basement and pulls off the price tag.
I just don't get it.
It's not in the movie anymore.
Sure I do either.
That was looped because of the rattle of the paper bag. Chet was very funny. His name's not Chet, of course, but the bellhop.
Yeah, she could have found him and then shot him.
I love this shot, too. As we come down on the dolly, past the screenwriter who makes a wisecrack, and then boom, photograph of Judy gets big in frame. You'll notice that the private eye now has a bandage over his nose, which is an homage to Chinatown. And in fact, I gave him the name of the other private investigator in Chinatown, Mulvihill. Okay, one of my favorite transitions from past to present here is we come through the scarily empty lobby. Angel has come back to slay this demon. He hears a noise, he turns, here come our people, and we cut back to David in the exact same spot, but in his present-day wardrobe. Again, I wanted more garbage in the lobby. To me, it just looks too neat and shiny, with a couple of pieces of paper on the floor. There was a whole bit here that got cut. I don't remember. Oh, this is where Cordelia was saying to Angel, it was about a woman, wasn't it? And I cut all that.
Do be careful. Ancient conjuring.
I thought this was funny, too. Gunn actually had a few more lines in the scene, but it was funnier for him just to throw it. And here comes the big surprise act break coming up, which we shot in pieces. I love that effect there that Lonnie put into that orb of whatever I called it. I can't remember at the moment. I think Thessala. No, that's a different orb. That's a Buffy episode. I'm all confused. Love this effect, too. The thing starts to appear, it's going to appear, it's going to appear, and then bing, we cut to elevator doors opening 50 years ago. We shot this a few times, again, just to get Melissa's paranoia level up. I thought she was very good. But these wider shots are from the first day that we shot it, and then this here was probably a couple days later, the closer shot, where she breaks away and points at him. There's a shot coming up here that reminds me very much of a shot from an old episode of The Twilight Zone. This shot here, I think it's from The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which was also actually an episode about 50s paranoia and the communist scare. There was a scene that opened this act that we lost, that we cut. It was more powerful just to come into the lynching. This episode was actually very easy for me to write. Once I knew what it was going to be, what the major beats of the story were, I sat down and I just very sort of slowly and deliberately began writing the thing. And as I like to print out a lot as I'm writing, I would print out a few pages and sort of place it gently to the side of my desk and go and write the next couple scenes. And it didn't change much at all from my first draft. The hanging was difficult. Never quite worked the way I wanted it to, but it's still pretty shocking. And I do believe that when they aired this initially in Britain, that they cut this. They cut a lot of scenes that they felt were too violent. And I do believe that they cut the lynching. So I think, from what I understood, that it was just Angel sort of hanging there in the noose, and we never actually saw him being lynched, which seems odd to me. Not sure how an audience can follow a story when they cut important moments. I mean, I had to cut 9 minutes, and it was very difficult to lose 9 minutes of story and make sure the thing was clear. It frightens me to think that a censor is going there and just randomly pulling out things without any consideration as to the story. I don't know how people follow that. And David comes out of the noose, and here comes the demon. The thing I liked about this demon, we do demons every week, or vampires, or what have you, and I just thought that this demon worked. And I was afraid of it, too, because we decided to do these tentacles, and boy, could that look cheesy. And somehow that worked, and we had him on a thing called a parallelogram, which is like a giant teeter-totter on wheels, and it's what gives him this floating effect. And it also makes him about 11 feet tall when you add in the tentacles. And I thought that was pretty scary. And, of course, the actor, I thought, was really good. And he's sort of doing this southern fried accent, which was not a choice that I made. It was a choice the actor made. And we all sort of liked what he was doing, and it kind of adds an extra dimension to the whole racism, paranoia theme without insulting anyone from the South, hopefully. I thought the makeup was great, too. I love this effect. And then it just sort of glides down toward David. And there's a beautiful shot coming up here. It's a beautiful frame, this kind of wide lens that holds them both in the frame as David turns toward us, and the demon goes out of focus, and I just think that's such a great image. And it starts drifting closer to him. The big dramatic moment here where Angel says, "Take 'em all," and walks out of the door. I think it works pretty well. However, we have nothing on the other side of that door. So you'll notice that you never actually see anyone entering that door, the front door of the hotel. Occasionally you'll see them exiting or entering, but you pretty much hear the door, and you don't see much. Because there's nothing out there to see except Stage 7 at Paramount. And that, I think, is a beautiful image. Scary. Scary-looking demon. And here's another transition, which I think worked very well. Cutting from the demon cackling with laughter to the demon screaming in pain because he's been forced back onto this plane.
Watch his tentacles.
Excuse me?
Some criticism here from people who thought that the demon was dispatched too quickly. In my mind, it's not too quickly. It's taken 50 years. And we will soon learn, as Denver told Angel in the bookstore, that the best way to kill this thing would be with a lightning strike, if you could arrange that. But since that's impossible, to hit it over the head with something heavy. But Angel has remembered this advice and didn't just restore the power, but rigged up the fuse box. And his plan is to electrocute the thing. And I believe it should happen quickly because I'm not that interested in seeing a big fight here. Plus, very difficult to have a big fight with a demon on a giant parallelogram with tentacles. He can only move so much. So my solution was to have him stick one of the tentacles into the fuse box. And I believe I set that up narratively earlier so that it makes sense. And what Angel has learned here is that the thing is still feeding, and we're about to find out what that means. I also thought Alexis was hilarious with his growing paranoia. Yeah, again, I think the visual effects really worked in this episode. Lonnie did a great job. And then we return to the 50s, what I call the Bernard Herrmann Vertigo following music theme, as Angel starts to rise up the stairs. There was a whole thing here where they were asking him where he was going, which I just pulled right out of the last cut. So they would just sort of watch him. And we understand by the look on their faces that they realize he's doing something, they're just not sure what. And Angel returns to Judy's room to find her still there after 50 years. The idea here was always that there was a lot more dialogue between old Judy and Angel, and I trimmed it out. but I hoped that it was clear and frankly not really that important how she survived. But she does tell him that the demon kept her safe and kept people away from the door and that it took care of her. And the idea being that there was some kind of symbiotic relationship between the two, so that when the demon is killed, she will die shortly thereafter. I think that's all pretty clear.
I don't hear them anymore.
I was more interested in the lyrical nature of Angel walking back into a room and somebody believing that he was a ghost and that she was responsible for his death, and for her asking him to forgive her. Because for the whole story, we feel like Angel has done something terrible and that he is trying to make up for that because he needs forgiveness. And in fact, what he needs to do is forgive somebody else, which was sort of a new idea for the show. And I thought David handled it beautifully. At one point, I had Melissa, the actress who plays young Judy, loop this entire scene with her own voice, because I wasn't sure that this older actress resembled her enough. But in looking at it on the mixing stage, while the looping was, it was first rate, every word matched the mouth movements, it sounded like somebody else's voice. It sounded almost like a cartoon where somebody had voiced it. And so we stuck with this actress's voice, and I think it works okay. Again, just a lot of dialogue that I pulled out of here. And for me, one of the main points of this story, too, is when she looks at him and says, you look the same, and he says, I'm not. Because, in fact, he is not the same. Would have been nice if we could have extended this death scene a little bit. I would like to have had more of a moment of him just looking down at her quiet, still body, but we didn't have any footage. Again, Robert Krall helping a lot with the music score here. And I think David, really underplaying this and doing a good job. It could have been very schmaltzy, and in fact, you may feel it is. But I like it. And now she's dead. Oh well. Wonder what he's going to do with the body. You're not supposed to think about those things when you're watching television. He'll do something. It'll be fine.
Paranoid.
And we find our group. And again, now the hotel becoming a metaphor for Angel himself. As Wesley says to him that this is a house of evil, and he says, not anymore. And obviously, Angel talking about himself here.
I think so.
Returning to his people.
Plus, kind of got older.
And David playing this exactly as I had seen it in my head. Not really looking at the others, but somehow contented and looking off at this place.
Surely you more than anyone.
And charisma being funny. And I also liked Alexis polishing his orb throughout the whole end of the story. And finally, the last thing that I wish we could have done slightly differently. I knew we wanted to pull out very wide and be looking down at our people in their new base of operations. And again, just some paper on the floor. Doesn't really look like it's been abandoned for 50 years. Then we come up and I think we see a light bulb in one of these chandeliers, and I had wished that several light bulbs. I had wished that we could have put some cobwebs or something on that, but we couldn't. And that's it.